Do we know why we say bless you when somebody sneezes?
No.
I've heard that we used to think that was like
A demon.
a demon or something like that.
I just made that up. I have no idea.
No, seriously. I am absolutely serious that people used to or I've heard that people used to think that was like some demon possession attempt or something like that. And so they would say, bless you, to try and ward off the demon. I don't know.
I don't know.
It also, in retrospect, sounds suspiciously made up that that's a thing. But there's a reason we say it, and I just don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is either.
I'll put it on the screen.
I also don't know what Gesundheit means in German.
That's true.
Like what it literally translates to, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't either. Anyway,
Offering nothing for y'all.
we are useless
Only
today.
questions.
Our knowledge is useless, and we have nothing to give and nothing to offer. My goodness.
That's been the new title of the podcast. Nothing to give, nothing to offer.
You know, this podcast is many things, and one of them is occasionally nonsense about random facts or us debating sandwiches.
Here we are.
Here we are. So glad you're watching. Okay, so is the season of stewardship officially over? Like, how does this work?
Forever. I mean, so
Forever.
for the most part, I mean, Commitment Sunday is like the big culmination of everything. We'll still, people can still turn in cards over the next, couple of weeks. It's a little more compressed now just because we got delayed by the winter storm. We're trying to finalize our budget in the next week or two. But
it's insane to me that the winter storm was like 2 weeks ago, and today it's almost going to be 80.
I know, it's nuts. My kids were
like, get like to
where did the ice go?
78?
And I'm like, well, we live in a very confusing weather climate, so I don't know what to tell you. But
Texas is very confused about weather.
I don't like
what
it.
it's supposed to be as far as climate. I don't know.
I don't like the climate. Yeah, it's not for me. But anyway, we're primarily done, and I just am sort of like unpacking all of that to try to catalog kind of where we were after one day. But especially in the first couple of weeks after Commitment Sunday, you usually have a lot more cards trickle in, people who were out of town or forgot to turn one in or just weren't ready yet or whatever. And so we'll definitely collect them over the next month just as people want to continue to turn them in. But this should give us a good sample size to know, okay, generally, where are we trending? Does it seem like we're pretty similar to last year? Is it going to be better? Is it going to be a little lower? And when it comes to impacting the budget, that's really just sort of a helpful understanding of the kind of top line number you pick. Do we think that our overall budget can support an increase? Does it need to remain the same? Should it go down?
Yeah, that's essentially what you were saying in the sermon, is that like this, like anything else, like this is what gives us a good idea of where we're headed. Because it would be the strangest year ever if we didn't get random large gifts throughout the course of the year. That stuff happens, or somebody joins and then decides they're gonna
start
commit and start giving, and so it's just a general idea, but it's that kind of start.
Right. It's trying to project trends because you're right. People move in, people move away, they pass away. I mean, things
Stuff
change,
happens,
and so you never know what it's going to look like. But your stewardship campaigns in general, in my experience, are a pretty good indicator of kind of where your overall giving is probably heading. And that's helpful to look over multiple years. The struggle with that is COVID threw a wrench into everything. And so while we're way past that in the sense of how that impacts most of day-to-day culture, our church is still kind of growing and rebounding from that, which has been great. We've had a lot of growth in the last years, kind of rebounding from that. But also when you have a change in leadership, at the preaching level. So like it's like David and I talk about money differently and go through these processes differently because every pastor does. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to compare. You're not really apples to apples when you're looking at how the kind of primary communicator changes. There's some shift there. And so I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock into the total campaign numbers comparing the last couple of years, just because so much has changed.
Yeah.
But there will be, I think, a better indicator is when you look at not so much new pledges, but when you look at the people who have given consistently, what are their numbers trending? Is everybody kind of staying the same? Are we seeing some increase? And I think that's a better indicator here in year one of a trend, is if somebody has consistently turned in a card at one level and then this year it bumps up. Well, maybe they were inspired, or maybe they got a raise at work. I mean, who knows? And so across the board, when you look at kind of macro trends, I think that's where I'll do more of that statistical analysis. The more years we do this, when you have consistency, space from COVID, clear vision, same communicator, you can start to look more granularly at the trends. But at some level, the cards do help in budgeting, absolutely. But they are far more a mechanism to help people grow their own giving and hold themselves accountable and set goals for themselves, and as a way for us to come together as a church and kind of make that commitment in that space. And so it's definitely a both and. They're helpful in both directions.
Church trends and statistics and numbers are always so interesting because there's so many things that you could attribute a change to. And more often than not, in my career through many different churches and seeing random dips for like a 2 or 3 week span, or even just a 1 week span, where all of the sudden it's like we're at like 60% of our just average.
Right.
And it's like, what happened? And it's like a normal weather day outside, and
Randomly people went on vacation.
yeah, it's just it's this weird thing that it's so often I'm like, what, like, how do we figure out what's what? Or then when all of a sudden things are on the uptick, trying to go, okay, well, what's the primary contributing factor to this uptick? What do we attribute that to, so we can continue to lean into this? If this is a good and healthy thing that is causing growth, whether that's numeric growth, whether that is more spiritual activity, whether that is more giving, whether that's even more just people saying, I want to volunteer out of nowhere, like, and then trying to figure out what caused it. That has been one of the strangest and most difficult things to get like a real answer, because most of the time when something big changes like that, we kind of look at it and go, well, we think
so
maybe
hard.
this, but who knows?
It's so hard because you can make numbers say whatever you want them to say.
You can.
And I think there's, to me, the bigger and the more zoomed out you can be over a longer period of time to kind of see those macro trends, the more reliable they are. And so if you look at worship attendance or membership over 10 years, and there's only so much you can do to finesse those numbers.
It's a good sample size, 10
Yeah,
years.
but
And
usually
when
we're
you have
looking-
a consistent, like, the pastor's the same
Yeah.
for 10 years. You
No
haven't
major
made any
calamities.
Yeah. I mean, but then, like, I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine who's lead pastor out at First Methodist Cleburne, and we were talking about how just the pre-COVID numbers. I saw recently what the pre-COVID numbers at Creekwood were, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that is insane. And then I had to go and find some old emails from a couple of my old churches that I worked at, where I knew some numbers were, and I looked at those pre-COVID numbers, and I was like, I had almost forgotten how impactful that pandemic was, which now just feels like a fever dream.
Yeah, I mean, it broke people's rhythm, and getting people to restart a habit or restart a rhythm is really, really difficult. So yeah, it's tough, but I think we want to look for answers in numbers, and we want to look more immediate. And so we look week to week or month to month, and you can drive yourself crazy by doing that. But I think numbers are very helpful for me as long as you understand the context behind them, because they change. So like this year, we're changing the way we track our online attendance to try to use a model that I think will be a little more consistent, but it looks like our numbers have like tripled.
It's crazy that we have 9,000 people watching right now. It's insane.
But you just have to make sure you're being consistent. So that's the difference. But also if you look at something like, if you look at number of baptisms last year, it's way outsized. Well, that always happens when you have a long tenured pastor that moves.
Leaving, yeah.
Because people are like, we've been meaning to get our kids baptized. We just keep forgetting to set a date.
We were doing baptisms, David's last 2 months, almost
weekly.
every week.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, I was watching. And that's very common because that's who you know. And so you want to make sure that you have that connection instead of waiting to get to know a new person. So our baptism numbers last year were inflated. This year, our like new members joining the church in the first quarter or in January are wildly inflated because we had a joining day. We intentionally picked a day and made it easier for people to join.
Is that a normal thing? Because that was the first joining day or joining Sunday that I'd ever done. I've never done that in a church.
I've only done it in one church that I was a part of, and it was two churches. One was a much larger church, and the bigger you are, you have to be at a certain size to have enough people to do this.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a joining day and you have one person or whatever. I mean, that's a little underwhelming, but it is partially that and partially like we did it when I was at the church plant too, because we had so many new people coming in all the time. We were trying to normalize routine and commitment and buying into, because it was a brand new thing. And it wasn't like, well, I've come here for 30 years. We were trying to kind of solidify that buy-in and the values and what that meant. But when I worked for a church that was a little larger, it was a practice that when I started working for them, I was a youth director, I think. They had done it for years. And it was the same reason that kind of we did it here was a lot of people want to join the church. They want to get baptized, but they just don't think about it. Or it's a little intimidating to kind of call the church and say, hey, I want to do this. And it can be intimidating to walk up there by yourself and do it. People don't know what to expect. And so...
Well, also for a lot of people, I think it's, what's the point? Like, does
why do I
something
need to do
change
it
now that
what
I'm
does
a
it mean?
member?
Yeah, do I get
versus-
like a key to the break room or like what happens, right? So, and we used to do when I was growing up, and some churches still do this, but when I was growing up, our United Methodist Church I think we only had a traditional service in this church I'm thinking of. But the pastor would always say, hey, as we sing our closing hymn, if you feel called to come and join the church family, we'd love to have you.
I remember that, yeah.
And so it was a call to join every Sunday during the last hymn. And we would have people that would, not all the time, but it was pretty common. They would come forward during the last hymn, and that was a nice mechanism because it gave them a chance to come forward, and the pastor could say, okay, like, who are you? Do I know who you are? Have you been baptized? Do you understand what this is? Great. And then they would stand up. We would say, all right, today we have Tom and Cheryl Jones, and they're coming to us by way of transfer from, First Methodist Church of Glendale, Arizona. And so we have a couple questions for them. Woo! And then we clap, and it was a kind of a regular thing, but that was also, in a day and age where you had much more denominational affiliation and leadership. This was, as the kids would say, this was back in the 1900s. But there was a much larger Christian presence in a day-to-day life for people. Like what I mean by that is a typical question would be, where do you go to church? Today, you would say, do you go to church? If you're even willing to ask that question. Yeah. And so I say all that to say most of our new people were transferring from other Methodist churches because you were denominationally affiliated. You had people join the Rotary Club and the Lions Club, and they were part of a denomination. Today, nobody has brand loyalty. Nobody has company loyalty. Nobody has denominational loyalty. Like, we just kind of freelance. We want to have options. We've democratized everything.
Well, it's kind of like the question is not now that it's gone from where do you go to church to do you go to church? It's now what social media are you on, not are you on social media?
Exactly. Yeah.
So are you on TikTok? Are you on Instagram? Are you on Facebook? Like what's your poison?
Am I about to get a lecture from you about why it's bad or why this one's better or what? I feel like anytime I ask anybody about social media, if they go, I'm like, oh man, I'm about to get a rant. They're about to rant about something, and I might love it or I might hate it. But
I mean, it's fun to hear somebody rant about something that you're passionate about when you are on the exact same page. Yeah. Like the purple lightsaber is the best lightsaber. Come on.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know why I keep reaching for Star Wars. I brought up Star Wars like 3 times. I guess because it's just more mainstream. But
It is very mainstream.
I didn't plan any of that. I was just in the moment trying to think of something silly people fight about. And as I was saying it, I think this is a good object lesson for why what I was saying I think is true. Is as I was describing Star Wars as the silly thing to argue about, I was like, but it's not silly. Why did I pick this? This is not a good example.
Also,
this is not a silly
everyone
thing.
knows Empire Strikes Back is the best one.
So anyway, I think that's the beauty of it is just there's real lived experience. But all to say, like, that's where statistics become dangerous, is because we value things differently as a culture. Membership used to be the cornerstone metric for forever. And that's kind of when you had the, have we talked about this? The Robert Putnam book, Bowling Alone, and the kind of shift from organizational identity in churches. So
No.
I'd love to do a whole segment on this at some point, but the long and short of it is Robert Putnam wrote a book like 25 years ago called Bowling Alone. And it was essentially his central claim was more people than ever are bowling today, but they're bowling alone, meaning there's been a sharp decline of bowling leagues. People don't bowl in leagues and as teams together because organizational identity in the United States has been declining for the last 50 years. And so he talks about sort of coming out of the Gilded Age and going into the Great Depression. The U.S. was at this crossroads of like, how are we going to survive? We're at a breaking point. And over the next 60 years, they built the strength of the United States, fought world wars, survived the Great Depression, all these things by creating organizations. And so this is where you see like Boy Scouts, Lions Club, Rotary Club, local church membership, all of these like organizations form. You became a card carrying member of whatever. Like organizational identity and joining and being a member of something became the way we built the country. And he I didn't coin this phrase, but it was the idea of a third place where you have home is your first place, work is your second place.
David and I have talked about
Yes.
this.
And so you had a third place, and most people had a lot of third places. So you would go to your Rotary Club for your civic engagement.
Because like home and work are places 1 and 2, right?
And your third place is a third place.
Yes.
So the third places would be like the Rotary Club for civic engagement, church for spiritual development. You'd have a bowling league or a poker night or something for fun and fitness. You have a volleyball league for fitness, and you do all these different things. So you got spiritual development, friendship, a physical fitness outlet, all these different elements. And then over the last 60 years, we've seen the decline in organizational identity in the country, where people no longer have sort of that, loyalty to organizations or denominations or brands or whatever. And
60 years?
You see, yeah.
I mean, I feel like just in my lifetime,
It's accelerated.
it's accelerated like crazy. I would have guessed this really since the turn of the century. So like,
Yeah, I mean, that's where the acceleration has happened, but you can see sort of in the 50s and 60s where this peaks. And then you start to see like church membership, a lot of the membership in these organizations.
what is that attributed to?
I think it's more about moving into more of an individualistic mentality. Whereas when we were fighting world wars, we came together as a nation, and we went from isolationism into more of a global, world, but we came together. And then you get, fracture, you have Watergate scandals and Vietnam protests where the country starts to then not be unified as we are fighting the Nazis or we are fighting one thing. It gets more complicated and things get fractured in those spaces.
Well, there's also the notion that American culture inherently is about the individual. We absolutely say it's all about personal success. It's all about personal happiness. Everything is individualized. Where if you go to a country like Japan, then it's the exact opposite. The individual matters very little, but the community is what matters. So like they think about their actions as how is this affecting everyone else versus how do I feel about this thing?
Yeah. And that's a big difference between biblical culture and modern American culture as well. So, I mean, you've just kind of seen that as that has democratized and become more individualistic. But anyway, he's got the book. I would not recommend trying to sit down and read the whole thing unless you really love statistics, because it's like 900 pages of stats and charts. But he's given a lot of talks. They made a little documentary movie about it. I think it's called Join or Die is what the documentary is called. But essentially, it's the I think it means like the organization. Join the organization, or the organization will die. I don't think it means you will die. But he does talk about the like you are more likely, like and if you look at the actuary tables, like you are more likely to have a longer lifespan when you join these groups. So where this comes into play today is that in the last 25 years, we've really seen the decline of those third places. So overall organizational identity was already declining. We're becoming more polarized. We're fighting with each other. We're not unified anymore. We're not joining groups and being members. Then over the last 25 years, we don't want to commit to anything. And you see the loss of those third places. And that really, the gas really gets smashed when social media comes around. And so
that was around 2003, 2004, 2005 that social media took over, because Facebook started hitting. I started doing that. I guess that was probably my freshman year of college.
2008 is the year that's marked because that's when it was available on your phone and you didn't have to have a college ID.
Oh, yeah.
You had to have a college email address. It was available to the general public.
2008.
That's when the iPhone allowed smartphone apps. And so
Crazy.
08 is sort of the prime. If you look at all the charts, that's where adolescent depression and suicide rates start spiking. It's where attention spans start to, it all happens around 08, and the housing crisis exacerbated everything. So that happens, and now people are losing their third places. And so they're not.
Well, the third place becomes digital, not a real physical thing.
Well, either that or, and you see this in young people coming out of college or entering the workforce out of high school, is they expect their job to be the sum of all of what those third places used to be. And so people want their job to pay their bills. They want it to be something they're good at, something they love, their life's passion. They want to experience emotional and spiritual support and meaning from it. That's why we're so big on self-care days. And so what happens is, and this parlays a little bit into the Enneagram, but you have personalities that are really good listeners and they're naturally empathetic, burning out in their jobs because their coworkers are using them as a therapist. They'll come in their office and vent to you, and you're like, I'm having to manage your emotions. I'm like a part-time therapist at work because these people don't have anywhere to go to receive mental, spiritual, emotional care. They don't have purpose, civic engagement, spiritual connection. They don't have any of those places. And so they expect their job to do everything. And that's why you also see career burnout and the tenure at which, especially Gen Z, are at jobs now shrinking way down because that job doesn't fulfill all of what used to be a volleyball league and a Lions Club and a local church, and all these different things used to fulfill all those different elements. Now your career has to do it all. And a lot of people are saying, like, I'm not making an impact. And everyone's like, you've been in your job for 6 months. How could you make an impact? You're 22. Like, it takes a while to make an impact. But that's not what, people are looking for straight coming out. So all to say, it's a fantastic book, and the way that it's shaped American culture, that those trends. And that's why, like statistics, if you like Mark Twain, like statistics will lie, in this idea that culture was different. Church culture, American culture, social media changed everything. Crisis that happens, if you don't understand sort of these major turning points and how they impacted the church. I heard a great person was talking about, I forget what the topic was, but the quote that stuck with me is, when the pandemic hit, the world changed. But for some reason, we thought that it wouldn't impact the church. We thought the church wouldn't change. And now we're seeing like everything in the world is different, but somehow we think the church is going to be the same as it always was. And so you have to take those things into account, and you have to understand. And that's the real problem with the church, is we have to both make it be what it's always been for people who've always been a part of the church, and it's so core to who they've always been, and to make them change to adapt to what church needs to be for someone who's never come is going to kill what they love about it. But you also have to make it accessible to people who've never come and are jaded and like have grown up in this digital world and think that the organizations in general they don't trust and they're suspicious of. Organized religion is corrupt. Pastors are pedophiles. Like all these documentaries and news stories they see, you're trying to compete with those two things. And it's really hard to foster and nurture a spiritual experience for someone who's 85 and has lived in a lifelong ministry of local church and what that looked like, and somebody who's 30, who just has kids, who's never really been to organized religion, doesn't really understand what it means, and is trying to encounter that in a very meet me where I am place.
Or figure out if they even want it.
The gap between, and everybody in between is in different spots, and everybody's got an idea of what that should look like. And so it makes local church really hard. And we've talked about this a lot. A lot of local churches try to be everything to everyone, and you can't. And a lot of times churches don't want to admit that the world has changed, their neighborhood has changed, and certain things that maybe really worked 20 years ago don't work anymore, or approaches that you had that were really successful just aren't the case. When I was young, I was a youth director, and basically you could get by if you had like free pizza, dodgeball, like you went to camp over the summers, like people would come. You could make a youth group happen with that very simple formula, because that's what youth ministry was for a long time. It was a lot of fun, and then you'd preach at them, put them in small groups, go to camp.
Yeah.
Well, now that was in a time where when kids were in extracurriculars, I remember growing up, I did one thing. Like I had one extracurricular. I didn't have 6 things at once. And if I had soccer, I had soccer practice once a week. Maybe we'd have one game on the weekend. Well, now kids are in practice 3, 4, 5 times a week. They've got tournaments on the weekend, plus they're in 4 other things. And they've got standardized testing and social media stress, and they've got to pick a major when they're like 15. I mean, it's just the stress and the demand on the schedule and the distractions and the things that they're exposed to online are so intense that now, like, spiritual care and youth ministry for teenagers has to be 10 times more intentional, because it's so much more complicated than it used to be.
Well, I do not envy Kevin's job to try and constantly understand what these kids are going through. And I mean, the plus side is that they are, I think, more resilient than we were, because they've been exposed to so much more. And they're definitely smarter than we were on a whole. And I think that that's just general how it goes. Like each generation kind of gets a little bit smarter if we're lucky. But yeah, I have,
they just said that the statistics show that Gen Z is the first generation for which that's not true.
Really? Mm-hmm. Oh no.
They tested like mental acuity, and it has to do with like memory, retention, some of these things, and they're attributing it all to like the rise of social media, digital technology. They're growing up with tablets in classes, where like they've measured the decrease in memory, attention span, all these things, how you term like executive function and mental acuity. That has gone up in every generation since they've started testing it. And they've seen it like plateau and even like potentially decline in Gen Z. So, which I love studies like that, because it's so obvious just to me anecdotally. I used to be a youth director, and you used to be able to preach to youth for 20 minutes. I've got friends who are teachers, and they're like, I used to be able to teach a sustained lesson. I have college professor friends who are like, I used to be able, even 10 years ago, I could give an hour-long lecture. Now, no chance. If I go more than 10 or 15 minutes without breaking it up with some kind of interactive activity or whatever, no one's paying attention. Not a single person. In seminary, we have 3-hour-long classes. I have a friend who's a seminary professor, and she's like, I used to be able to lecture for 3 hours straight. She's like, that's a joke now that I could ever dream of lecturing for 3 hours. There's no way people could pay attention. And I was like, to be fair, I sat through those 3-hour lecture classes. 3 hours is a long time to listen to a lecture, but you can see very measurable trends in it. And so, yeah, I mean, it is having very real impacts on people. And I think that we're ignoring it. We don't think it matters. And spiritual decline also tracks it. It's just that people aren't studying that as much as we are tracking educational or intellectual decline, because it's harder to measure. No one can agree on it.
There's a question that lies in there that I always want to ask, because it seems obvious sometimes, but not all the time, that were we doing the most efficient was what we were doing, the way we were doing it, like whether it's 3-hour lectures, whether it's so was the way we were doing it the most effective way to do it?
Sure.
And that's a hard question to answer, because it's a moving target. That it changes with new technology, with how people receive and retain information. But I often think about that same thing in regards to worship. So what we're doing is the same model that's pretty much been, we've made incremental changes here and there, and every church has their own variation on this. But are there churches out there doing something completely wildly different to try and fix this kind of issue of retaining things or attention spans being all over the place? Like, because there are a lot of very successful, very famously like impactful preachers and pastors out there that their average preaching time, sermon time is like an hour or 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And, we're sitting somewhere between 22 and 25 here. And for some people, they're like, oh my gosh, can you wrap it up? Like,
Right.
And I mean, I'm all for the 40-minute sermon. Let's go. I like it. You can do a lot more with that just by the sense that you have more time to dive into something or a concept or teach an entirely new concept. But so is there something that we could theoretically change or add or take away from worship that would make worship just straight up more effective for younger minds?
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem is the more you gear it toward a certain demographic, the more it makes it inaccessible for others. But I do think that I've seen two kind of approaches to this. And one is you meet people where they are and what the culture is doing. So what Paul would call syncretism. You sync up to the culture. So I've seen some churches that are trying to replicate what like a Grammy performance is, what a Netflix show is, like whatever they're going to experience in other avenues of their world. They want the church to match the form, quality, and style and look of it. And so there are some churches where you can look at their social media presence and it's very similar to the social media presence of commercial corporations. You could walk into some church buildings and it looks and feels very similar to some, a hotel or a corporate building you might walk into. In that space, some worship services really feel like concerts, way more like concerts than what historically a church service has been.
Right.
What does that look like? And so in some ways, I think I've seen that. That is very difficult to pull off because you're trying to keep up with the leading edge of for-profit companies that just have way more resources than you do typically.
Yeah.
So that's difficult to pull off. I've seen a reaction in the complete opposite direction of people. I've seen a lot of increase in people taking up more ancient spiritual practices of, meditation and silence and sort of trying to go the opposite direction. We're pulled in 1,000 directions. Everything is so loud. Culture is screaming. Social media is flooding us. We're getting hit with ads constantly. Everything is loud and flashing and faster and more and more and more, trying to disengage from that and try to get out into soft, silent meditation, trying to find peace, trying to completely remove yourself from those. And so I think that that's where a lot of the reaction I feel like is in one of those two directions. But my struggle is, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a youth director the other day, and they were saying, I'm trying to navigate the line of including the youth in the decisions we make about like leadership programs and what we do in the youth program and the trips we go on, because I want them to have buy-in with also knowing that their brains are not done developing and they don't know what they need. And I heard a talk maybe 10 years ago from somebody who was talking about millennials entering the workforce. And this is not applicable anymore. It would be to Gen Z if you changed it. But back when millennials were first entering the workforce, now, all of them were in their like early 20s, there was a real struggle because you had a bunch of primarily baby boomer managers who were saying, this is a lazy generation. I can't get them to engage. I can't get them to whatever, which is kind of funny now that we've seen where that trend has changed.
Simon Sinek interview?
Yes. And he talks about how, you ask them what they want and they'll tell you, we want free food and we want bean bags and but they don't know, they're just making stuff up. And so you do all those things and turns out it actually doesn't change any of the results. They're maybe a little happier, but they're not producing any more. They're not making an impact. Your company's bottom line isn't moving because at the end of the day, people don't know what they need. They might know what they want, but they don't know what they need. And so I think that's what this youth director friend of mine was saying as well, is they're like, they can tell me stuff, but I don't know that they really know know what they need or what's going to work, but I've been working with them for 10 years. Like, I know what's working and what's not, and trying to balance those two. And so I think that's the other struggle is either if we're trying to reach out to young people and make worship more accessible to them, either we make the mistake of never talking to a young person, and so we're completely out of touch with the generational realities and how they see the world, or we rely solely on their opinion when they might have an idea, but they don't know what they're doing either. They don't work in ministry full time. They have no clue. It might just be something they like personally.
Sure.
That might not be helpful. The other element in this is, what is a young person looking for? And I think sometimes we're asking question number 3 when we should be asking question number 1, because young people historically has always been the lowest attendance of any church across the board. And a lot of it is because that's where you're moving away from your family of origin. You're learning who you are as a person. You're separating out from that. And so either you're adopting the religion of your parents, you're directly rebelling against it, or you're just not going because church is early on the weekend and you don't want to be up early on the weekend. Yeah. You're trying to figure out who you are. A lot of kids are rebellious when they first move out of the house, and rebelling away from religion is a very cliche way to do that. And so I think a lot of times it's rethinking, what does that look like? Is it a traditional church model, or do we need to be trying to reach this demographic that historically doesn't come to any church of any style in a classic way, meaning like a worship service in a church on a Sunday morning, and rethink the way we do it? So like the big college ministry I was a part of in college was at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Mm-hmm. So like, how do we rethink the way that we do these things and approach people and specialize? Because not every church can do it.
Well, I mean, church is such a unique pastime in and of itself, just by the stance of what it is. Like you're going to this thing, you are giving your resources for it to be part of new disciplines that you're adding to your life. Like no other third place option behaves that way. Yeah. And in theory, the way that we're looking at this is that, well, no other third place is going to have, life-changing, spiritual, interpersonal things that will advance your life from a very three-dimensional interpersonal soul, heart change, and you become a better version of yourself because of what you are aiming for. That's kind of the general idea of it. And there's not many things that outside of just like hiring a therapist that really do that. But that's just a transactional thing. This is more. Yeah, there's more going on. But I don't know. I get the idea of a larger church using the model of a big company. Like, well, how do they draw people in? Yeah. Well, let's do some of that. Let's make it louder and have flashier lights, and people like that stuff. So let's try it. Or let's center it around something that does bring people in. Let's create physical activity. We're gonna put a basketball court in our church, and people like doing that. People pay Lifetime or LA Fitness to go play basketball. Mm-hmm. Well, we have one of those here. Do it here. Like, I get those things, and those are great. I wish we had basketball here that was inside. That would be wonderful. Yeah, I could get my shots in. But just trying to figure out how to most effectively make it so that people feel like this is a place where they can find that spiritual growth. And what's different about here than anywhere else?
Yeah, I think the struggle is that when you think about what motivates people to purchase, what motivates people to follow, what motivates people to join something, or what motivates behavior in humanity, especially when it comes to religion, by a mile, the most effective method is carrot and stick. It is incentive and threat. It is transactional.
Perks.
And that's where you see,
what perks do I get by doing this?
Or you go to hell. So you scare people.
Oh, that
fear is by far the most effective technique to get people to change behavior. And also with the incentive, what's in it for me? Mm-hmm. What's in it for me? What's in store for me if I don't do this in a bad way? And then what's in it for me if I do well? Because we are inherently self-interested creatures. We talk about the reason for that in the fall of humanity. But there's this idea that avenue is the most effective way, and most religions use it. That's not what our denomination chooses to lean into. We choose to motivate people through inspiration and community and hope and love. That's the second most effective thing, I think, that motivates people, but it's a distant second, and it's way harder because
This reminds me of a Parks and Rec episode where both Chris Traeger and Ron Swanson are going to try to get Jerry to file something using fear tactics, the other using positive reinforcement, and the results are hilarious. And when
April,
he's scared,
April wins it
he
all.
does more, but he does them wrong.
Right.
And then when he's happy, he does them correctly, but he does far less because he's enjoying it and spent like an hour on the phone with his wife saying how good he feels.
Yeah. And so you see the same thing where you have a lot of religions that'll tell you exactly what to do, how to live, how to behave, or else. And so that reaches a lot of people. It's concrete. People like strong leadership. Tell me what it is. You know, I don't know. I'll follow you because I trust you. That, is tough if it doesn't work out, because that's a very ironclad way of walking through the world. But if your approach is where we land a lot more, which is where, grace is free and love and hope and community, it's the sense of you're going to get, when you think about what's good for a kid or a human in general, and you have, the Happy Meal and you've got the fully cooked, asparagus and baked chicken. You've got like a healthy meal and you've got junk food. You've got candy and you've got broccoli.
Baked chicken and asparagus sounds so good right now.
It really does. But when you're trying to compare, I'm thinking with my kids, like when I'm trying to get them to eat healthy, like they want ice cream, they want candy because it's instant gratification. That's what they want. In the long run, it's bad for them. In the long run, the vegetables are good for them, but it's not in the short run. That's the same in religion. And I think that's where we're spending so much time trying to get people to eat their vegetables, and that's difficult. And that's all of what stewardship was. It is my impassioned plea. Generosity is not going to give you instant gratification. It is going to cost you something. It's going to hurt. You're going to have to reorient your budget. If you really want to follow biblical mandates for giving and be generous in the way God wants us to be generous, you're going to have to give what is probably going to feel like an insane amount of money compared to what you typically have. And that is not going to feel good up front. That is not going to feel like what you want to live into. But the long-term benefits of generosity, of backing your values, it's the only way that churches exist. It's the only way organizations exist. It's the only way countries get built. It's the only way families get built. It's the only way anything of substance gets built is slow, sacrificial dedication of people. And is it going to feel good right away? Are you going to get that instant hit of dopamine? Are you going to? No. But
not
you're
always,
also
sometimes.
not. And that's where you coming back to the struggles of modern day, especially youth culture coming out into the workforce, is people want that instant gratification. They want to make a lot of money right away. They want to make a huge impact on the world. They want to change the world. They want to have meaning. They want to have purpose and fulfillment. That takes decades to develop and to build up. And people don't want to put their legwork in because they see now on social media that I don't have to. I can go online and stream. I can go over here and I've got quick ways to get there.
Yeah.
We used to live in a culture of apprenticeship where you knew the trajectory to success was there for you, but you had to work and work your way up. Well, now people don't want to wait. They want to get it now. They don't want to do this. They want to be a billionaire by the time they're 30. And it's like, okay, but
I love the apprenticeship model of just working under somebody for pennies and for years and years and years. But then when it's all said and done, you have mastered something valuable that nobody else can do what you do. And it's because you essentially suffered for a while. And it's a little more to it than that, but still, I think that's...
Well, and I also miss the idea that now our jobs and our careers always have to be our life purpose. And I'm like, that's just not going to be the reality for a lot of people.
Well, it can't be because if you clean porta potties or if you...
even if you're an accountant or you're a doctor, you may like helping people.
Nobody should be that excited about certain jobs. And if you are, that's a little weird. And I don't think I want to be your friend.
I'm just trying to recapture this idea that find something you're good at, something that can earn you a good living so you can chase your life passion over here. Because I will tell you, as somebody who turned their life passion into their career, there are some days where I hate the church, and there are some days where ministry makes my blood boil, and I resent the church, and I resent God sometimes, and I resent people in the church, and all of this, because when you mix your passion and your love with your work, you see different sides of it. And that's why I always caution people, like when they want to start working for a church, especially on like a super part-time basis, I'm like, look, it changes.
You're going to
when
see
your
behind the
ministry
curtain.
becomes your job, it's very different. And so I think that's where my heart breaks for a lot of people, because it's not just in the church, but if you have something you absolutely adore, if you love to do music, you're a great example. Like if you do love to do music, playing music for the love of music is amazing.
It's the
playing
best.
music to earn a living is a nightmare.
Hard.
It is so unbelievably hard, and it will make you. It can not make you hate the concept of music, but it can make you really sour on and resent the mechanics of music that you used to love doing, because now they're your job, and now it's difficult, and if it doesn't work, you can't make ends meet, and they take it for granted when you used to have this great love for it. And so I think that's where, like, the death of the third place, the death of my life's passion doesn't have to be my job, because also we used to have a cost of living was lower. You used to be able to go clock a 9 to 5 and make enough to come home. You could buy a house. I mean, you go on vacation. You could do all those things. And that's the other issue with this of our workaholic culture and inflation, where wages haven't kept up, is now you do have to kind of kill yourself just to buy a home and kind of navigate the world. And it's put our culture in a really difficult spot. And I think I don't know that we're real, because I think we're in the middle of it. Our culture has changed so rapidly in the last 20 years with the advent of digital technology. And I just think that we haven't really figured it out yet. I think we're in the middle of it, and we're trying to figure it out.
Now we've got we're on the verge of this, and I'll try and keep this brief, but we're on the verge of AI becoming so proficient at so many things that a lot of jobs start to become non-human jobs, and now we're gonna start to try to figure out how to navigate that. And I was watching a podcast interview this morning that's talking about that very thing, where we are way closer than a lot of people think for major areas where there's a high population density, that a lot of these jobs that do not require manual labor are going to start to become much more efficient for the company to buy a service that is a very specific AI program that does exactly what a human would do, but way more consistent, way faster, and way better results for a fraction of the cost of hiring a human. And that makes their bottom line go like in the right direction for if you're just in it for money.
Oh yeah.
And now we're going to have all these people that have student loans. They're like, why did I even go to school for this?
Well, and I think it's like anything else. And I would love to have a much larger conversation about AI, because I have heard more recently some competing ideas of where we're headed, from the doomsdayers to where Skynet's going to be self-aware any day now, to like people who are like, it's the increases are plateauing. Like the percent better that AI is with each iteration is declining. Like it's getting better, but the rate at which it's increasing is plateauing, and the cost is spiraling, that at some point you get a diminishing return where it's not, the small increase from ChatGPT 4 to 5 is not worth the cost of infrastructure and servers and R&D that has to go into it, that it might plus. So anyway, there's all these competing ideas around it, and I think that it's a fascinating conversation, but it's way too long, so I don't want to get into it.
We're this is going to be a long episode, but we've hit a lot of cool topics.
Yeah.
So we'll close out with this. You talked a bit about the risk to reward ratio.
Yeah.
On Sunday, and where should Creekwood take more risk?
This is a great question, and I have not considered that, because we talked about stewardship as both how we steward resources individually and as a church. And you're right. The whole message on Sunday was if you want to change the world, you know, we talk about this with Peter. Like if you want to walk on water, you have to get out of the boat. You have to have the courage to take that risk and step out there.
So where would you like to see Creekwood take
that risk? I think I would like to see Creekwood create a coherent vision for who we are that is specific, and that's going to mean saying no to some things.
So it goes back to last week's podcast, identity.
I think we have to really figure out who that is and then get serious about it and set actual goals and take steps. And I think the steps are where the risk can come in. And I think right now, like in a lot of ways, churches also play it safe. In the kind of what I talked about on Sunday, how people play it safe. Churches also play it safe. They work on the things they know. Everybody, I mean, I can't get into all that, but churches will often do what they know will work, or they'll take small incremental steps, or they'll say like, we want to grow, so everybody go invite a friend next week. Well, great. It's not a bad thing, but like that's not really going to grow your church in the way you need to. And so I think if we're going to take a risk, it's going to be like, how do we set up our budget? How do we set up our property? What programs do we offer? Where do we put our time and our resources? So it's the same question that I ask people to consider personally. Where do you put your time and your resources? And if you want to change the world through the church and your faith, you have to prioritize the work of God in whatever way that looks like, whether it's in the local church or in your personal life. You have to prioritize that in the same way you do for anything else. Your child's success and their future is important to you. You're going to prioritize that. You're going to get them in things. You're going to drive them to extracurriculars. You're going to pay for those things. You're going to pay for their school. Like you're going to invest in that. And so you do have to do that. I think that same conversation has to happen for the church. I think that we don't have the clarity around where to focus that, but I think the risk will come in two places: in creating a sharp, clear vision that is going to exclude some things. That'll be tough. And then really putting resources behind that and really aligning our energy and our staff and our property and our budget and everything and our vision, the way we talk about it, what we preach about, how we publicize the nature of the church to the community. I think you have to really get behind something. If you want to achieve a goal, you have to try. And I think that's the problem. A lot of times we create a goal, but we don't actually try to achieve it. We just hope it happens. And we'll say like, we want to grow. Great. What tangible steps are you taking to get there? Well, we're going to try to make everything a little better, and we're going to make some social media posts. Okay. Well, I can tell you that's not going to work. So like, that's like saying I want to get in shape. And it's like, okay, so I'm going to talk about being in shape to everybody. I'm going to drive past the gym 3 times this week. No, you got to get in there, man. Like you got to make some real changes. And so I think that like Creekwood does so many incredible things, but because we don't have like a tangible, measurable goal, once we create that, if we want to meet it, we will necessarily have to make changes and take some risks. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think that's where the risk will come in is making those decisions and trying to lean into a clear plan. And it's going to be I'm very excited to see what that looks like. And it can feel scary and it can feel like a risk. But look, if you don't take a risk, you can't walk on water if you don't get out of the boat. And so if you don't want to get out of the boat, ask the bishop for a new preacher, because I love that. And I want us to move. I want the church to grow. I want us to be serious about this in that space. And I think that for a long time, I mean, it's easy to status quo, and it's easy to just kind of steady as she goes. And when I read scripture, I see not one mention of steady as she goes when I see Christ talk. And so
sky's the limit for us.
Here we go.
Here we go. Thanks for hanging out. Catch you next week.
See y'all.